Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Stephen, Rabbi Shmuel with you with this week's 10-minute Torah. First of all, happy Hanukkah and happy Rosh Chodesh, because our portion of Miketz actually falls on Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh. And that means that we do something that we only do once, sometimes very rare, very occasionally, twice a year, and that is we remove three Torahs. So the first Torah is going to be the regular reading of Miketz, and we're going to talk about something interesting in a second. The second Torah will be for Rosh Chodesh, and the third Torah will be for the specific Hanukkah reading for that particular day of Hanukkah, which, by the way, is found in Numbers. And since Hanukkah means dedication, because it was a rededication of the temple, then they use the passages from the donations from each of the tribes in building the original Mishkan. Now, somebody asked me an interesting question. At first, they didn't want to ask. They thought, never mind. I said, no, go ahead. What's the question? And they asked, how did the Maccabees know that the oil, the olive oil that they only had for one day, was actually going to last for 8 days? And I remarked that was a great question. That is, in fact, the question. And the answer is they didn't. That's what made it a miracle. They lit it. They expected it to go for one day. Next thing you know, it's going for the full 8 days. So that's the miracle. So why is it that the second Torah is read for Rosh Chodesh, and then the third Torah is read for Hanukkah? So the Rosh Chodesh reading comes before Hanukkah. Since it's the holiday of Hanukkah, why don't we read that reading before we read Rosh Chodesh? So here's the rule of thumb. The more frequent or the most frequent readings go first. So we have a weekly Parsha, 50 or 54 weeks a year, parshas a year, depending on whether it's a leap year or not. So that is the most frequent. So that's the first reading, and those are the first 6 aliyot. The seventh aliyot is for Rosh Chodesh, and there are 11 or 12 Rosh Chodesh readings every year. Why 11 or 12? Because, well, we do a special reading for Rosh Hashanah. So I guess if you want to consider that, then we have 12 or 13, depending on whether there's a leap year or not. And Hanukkah is 8 days. So 8 readings versus 12 versus 50 or 50, 12 or 13 versus 50, 54. So you see the order. Now, my mentor, Cantor Joe, years ago told me that Miketz is an interesting portion. So in Hebrew, you have suffixes and prefixes that tell you what tense the verb is, whether it's future or past, whether it's me, you, I, whatever. So take, for example, Yomer. That means he will say. In biblical Hebrew, which I'm starting to realize, or I think, my opinion is that it's sort of a dialect of modern Hebrew. If you put in biblical Hebrew a va, which typically means and the, in front of the future tense, that makes it the past tense. That's why you see in Hebrew a lot of va and then the verb. Vayomer. In last week's portion, vayashev. And he settled, or he sat, settled. Ancient Hebrew is very conceptual. So there's a lot of vavs in any particular reading because it's the past tense. And in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, the verb comes before the noun. Now, in Miketz, if you look at a lot of the verses, you're going to see a whole lot of vavs. And what does a vav look like? It's the letter looks like this. It's a stick up and down with a little thing on top sometimes. It looks like a candle, doesn't it? So Cantor Joe seemed to think, or he said that one of the mystical interpretations of this portion is that there was only maybe 6, 7, or 8 verses that didn't start with a va. So there's your Hanukkah menorah. Interesting, huh? Okay, so what is Miketz? We have last week's portion where Joseph was sold out of the jealousy of his brothers, ends up in Egypt. First, he is the head of household. He's the slave. He's Potiphar's, who is actually was a courtier, kind of a viceroy of his own, one of the top guys in the Pharaoh's government. Ends up as his head of household. Then he's put in jail because of the false accusations of Potiphar's wife. And now and at the end, he has interpreted dreams successfully for the baker and the cupbearer. Now, Pharaoh has some really disturbing dreams. He has the first dream that these plump cows come out of the Nile. They're on the bank. They're eating the grass. Everything's fine. And all of a sudden, these 7 scraggly cows come up and they swallow the full plump cows whole, and not a difference in the cows. He's disturbed. It was almost like a vision, like a prophecy, which, as we're going to find out, it kind of was. He gets up startled. He goes back to sleep, has another dream that these grains, I guess they were corn, sprout up 7 buds on one stalk, plump, juicy, whole grain. Then another stalk comes up with 7 scraggly ears, and it kind of devours the other grain. And he startled. None of his wise men, none of his necromancers, his wizards, his magicians, are able to interpret the dream to his satisfaction. The chamberlain of the cupbearers, that was the one that survived, all of a sudden remembers. He wants to get on Pharaoh's good side. Oh, well, there was this Hebrew youth a couple of years ago when you put me in jail, for doing that thing. And of course, you've exonerated me. Thank you so much. You're so great. Kind of schmoozing him a little bit. But he was able to interpret the dream. So Pharaoh says, well, send for him. Clean him up, shave off his beard, clean him up, put him in some nice clothes. And he relates the dreams to Joseph. And there's a little bit of a difference in the first discussion of Pharaoh's dream and what he relates to Joseph. Now remember, in the Torah, nothing is spared. Everything in the Torah, it's very economical, it's very sparse, but everything is very important. Why repeat the dream and why the discrepancy? Some people feel that Pharaoh was testing Joseph to see if he could really knew his stuff. Also, it gives us a little bit more information. So he relates the dreams to Joseph. And here's kind of the commentary, if you will. Some of the commentary is that the cows, the plum cows, stayed by the riverbed of the Nile, which was like a god, and the scraggly cows didn't confine themselves to the riverbed. Okay, so first we have the pasturing, then we have the harvesting. The grain was the harvesting. So we kind of have sort of a continuum, a succession of events. Then we have the fact that the cows didn't really move, the grain didn't really move, and the fact that nothing changed in them. So the commentary, Joseph listens to the dreams and he says, okay, first of all, I want you to know emphatically, it's not me that's going to interpret the dream. God is going to speak through me, and it's God that's going to interpret the dream because God is showing Pharaoh a vision. And the vision that God is showing Pharaoh is that you're going to have 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. Now, the fact that the cows stayed by the riverbed means that Egypt is going to enjoy the plenty. But when the scraggly cows came out and they moved away from the riverbed, what that indicated is that the rest of the ancient world is going to experience the famine. So, thus, Joseph knew to tell Pharaoh, store your grain because the world's going to be coming to you to buy grain. So, what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh stores the grain, doubles the tithe. Instead of 10%, he makes it 5%, so that now they'll have extra grain. And as it turns out, there is a famine. People come, Pharaoh's wealthy, etc., etc. And Joseph is in Pharaoh's good graces. Now, Pharaoh, listening to Joseph's assessment and the fact that he gave him a solution, Pharaoh says, you know what? I'm going to make you viceroy of Rach. is the word. Father, Rach, like Rex, king, right? Father king. And he is second only in command to Pharaoh. Gives him a signet ring, gives him new clothes, gives him a new name, Zaphaneth Paneah. Because, I mean, like the Egyptians, they were pretty xenophobic. They didn't like strangers. Are they going to accept a stranger, especially a Hebrew, that they considered beneath them because they ate animals, which were their gods? No. So Pharaoh basically makes him an Egyptian. And he gives him Potiphar's daughter, who was an Egyptian princess, and the fact that the Torah says that Joseph had the two sons, not his wife had the two sons. Jacob had the two sons means that Manasseh and Ephraim adopted their father's religion. And that's why we say that blessing for the children, may you be like Manasseh and Ephraim, who stayed true to the ethical monotheism in the land of pagans. Shabbat Shalom, and looking forward to see you at a Hanukkah party, and thank you for listening.